hello. For those who don't know me, my name is Sergey Slavutsky, and I'm a first-year PhD student here at ITP. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our symposium. I hope that I pretty much know that everybody enjoyed the presentations this morning and afternoon. I had the great pleasure and honor of meeting Dr. Emma Bragdon in the fall of 2010. At that time, I learned about her affiliation with Brazilian spiritual healers and John of God in particular. Dr. Bragdon has been studying the phenomena of spiritual healing in Brazil since 2001. She's a successful author of several books. Her two most recent books are Spiritism and Mental Health and Resources for Extraordinary Healing. We're delighted that Dr. Bragdon agreed to travel from Vermont to be with us today and to share her research on groundbreaking mental health care in Brazil. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Bragdon.
So, I was told to use this. That sounds like it's working.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
working. So I had the great pleasure of seeing Arthur Hastings today, who was a very important person for me, signing off for my dissertation after the last dot was put on the dissertation. And Arthur held me to it, and I must say I've thanked him over and over again, in my mind usually, for the detail that he asked of me at that particular point. So I should say the detail as well as the lasting friendship, which has been very important to me. And the work that you did, Arthur, around channeling was part of opened the door somewhat for me to look into Out of the Tongues of Angels. So there weren't so many books around at that time that struck me.
That's right.
Yeah.
You should. I would want to say that Emma wrote the first comprehensive book on spiritual emergency and treatment of people with psychological problems, but from a transcendent place. Thank you for putting that book into circulation and making it a part of our life.
Well, I was fortunate enough that the Spiritual Emergence Network was just beginning to work within Vallombrosa Center and be at ITP, and I happened to be walking across the lawn at a particular time. Someone else was walking across the lawn. Synchronicity happened, and suddenly my dissertation grew out of that particular meeting, and the source book for helping people in spiritual emergency grew out of various meetings that happened just from that happening across the lawn at the Vallombrosa Center. So I continue with my interest in spiritual emergency, but as you all probably know, spiritual emergency has kind of reformulated itself, and as far, at least from the conventional point of view, the spiritual problems, the diagnostic category in the DSM for spiritual problems, I felt was an important thing to switch over to because it became more part of the language than spiritual emergency. But one of the things that took me to Brazil actually was all of the profound phenomena that are going on there, but then how do they handle it when people start having the same symptoms we would associate with spiritual emergency, like a profound disorientation. And one of the things I learned is that repressed mediumship is one of the diagnostic categories they use. Not in the DSM of Brazil, but within Spiritism, they actually recognize that some people are natural mediums, and if they repress that part of themselves, then it can lead to the same kind of symptoms that we associate with psychosis. So if we had that in our DSM up here and around the world, it might create a different kind of world for at least the people who are developing their intuition or are really gifted with mediumship, because we might be able to be supported through the process of integrating that completely and be able to train that part of who we are so we can better be in service to people, ourselves as well as others. So before I go on, I wanted to say I had the pleasure of meeting Neil King today and talking about the drama that's going on. Is that the right word? The drama around the school. Changing. He didn't use it. I did. But I realized that the school is going through big changes right now. And I'm not someone that is constellating this way or that way, but I've just had a great deal of faith and trust in Neil and feel that there's a wonderful person at the helm right now. So it's my pleasure to meet him. One big disappointment today for me was this particular book, Resources for Extraordinary Healing, is my most recent book, and there's a chapter in it devoted to the work that Sergei does, and I was able to participate in that work a year and a half ago for the first time, and I was very impressed with it, and I wrote up some of my own story as an illustration of particular kinds of work that are happening in this country that bear some relationship to what's going on in Brazil. So I'm staying in Berkeley, and the woman who is the matron of the house, as it were, up there, just called me a few minutes ago and said the book's arrived. Aww. So unfortunately they aren't here, and this is a proof copy. So it's Resources for Extraordinary Healing, Schizophrenia, Bipolar, and Other Serious Mental Illnesses. And it gives a very brief introduction to the Spiritist work that's being done, well, I should say, the work that's being done in the Spiritist Psychiatric Hospitals, where they're combining spiritual healing work with conventional therapies. And one of the things that has been a great blessing and a great opening for me is meeting psychiatrists who are also mediums. And so they are very, very well trained and capable of functioning as mediums and healers, and at the same time put on the other hat, which is their training as medical doctors and psychiatrists, and be able to diagnose and treat a patient from that particular point of view. So, anyway, Sergei's in this book. So, let me see. What I want to do is show you a film that I co-produced with a woman by the name of Anne McSood. It's on Spiritism, and that is about a half-an-hour documentary. And then I wanted to speak a little bit more about the research that is in the pipeline to be done in Brazil. So I feel extremely excited about the research, but I just wanted you to know I'm not going to be telling you what the results of the research are today, because the research hasn't been done. What I will just say is about research in general around Spiritism is that Spiritists believe that the fast track to their version of enlightenment, which really is very similar to the Buddhist version, which is moving further and further, deeper and deeper into love, compassion, action, and wisdom. So within that track, if a Spiritist doctor opens the door and there are two people there, and one is a researcher coming to say, I'll prove you've got the best thing since sliced bread, and the other person saying, I feel really bad, and I've been feeling bad for a long time, can you help? The person who needs help is going to be the one that gets the attention. So the exciting news for any of you here who are interested in research is that there is an enormous open field in Brazil for doing research, and it's an extremely exciting time to be doing research there, because several of the Spiritist Psychiatric Hospitals are saying, we aren't going to turn the researchers away, it's time, and the whole vocabulary around spirituality and health being meaningfully connected has become something that is showing up in their literature more and more. So because it's showing up, and because a lot of the people who've been in training as psychologists and psychiatrists have been traveling internationally, rubbing shoulders with people who are looking for research methodology around how do you do research in this field where you're trying to measure the effects of people talking to spirits who are invisible, and where there are many, many different dimensions of reality that are being related to. Those doctors, after the conferences or after their postdocs in the United States, are coming back to Brazil and saying, we've got to do this, let's do some more research, let's do some more publication in international journals. So I've been fortunate enough to meet some of those people, and these are doctors who are teaching within the medical schools down there. So they're very highly trained, very well respected, and they're trying to get research going. So I'm in the process of putting together an international team, because it seems to me that up here in North America, we've got a lot of discipline that comes from really doing research over a long period of time and being keyed into the focus of that of the research. And I know that ITP is, especially in the last 30 years, has moved more and more into research. So we have more of that background of thinking through the difficulties of doing research with the invisible and the varieties of ways we can approach that realm. And they're saying, okay, we understand, we need some help, and let's do this particular kind of research. And we have over, in other words, they have in Brazil, over 100 years of working with this dovetailing of spiritualism and psychiatry. So it's an incredible, rich, fertile field, and they have, as you'll see in the film, they have made some judgments about the effectiveness of the treatment and how important it is to bring spirituality into healthcare, especially with people who have severe psychiatric disturbances. But from our perspective, we'd probably say, well, you know, does it really fit the standards of that we know and love now for international well-respected research? And research was never my strong suit, but I look at some of the work that's been done, and I don't think it's just my language skills. I think there's a little bit more to be desired. So having a international team comprised of people from the United States and people from Brazil is the way to go. And they're certainly friendly. So, and I'm meeting more and more friendly people here who'd like to do that research, so it's a good place. So there are a couple more things I wanted to say, just very briefly, to give context to Spiritism. How many people here have brushed shoulders with Spiritism and feel like they know it? 1, 2, 3. Oh, great, great, wonderful. Well, as I've, one of the questions that I have continually asked as I've traveled around Brazil in the last 11 years, spending 3 to 6 months there every year, is how many Spiritist centers are there? And what I've heard is that there are approximately 13,000. So that doesn't show up if you look at the national surveys for who is involved with what religion. Mainly because there's a great deal of confusion about whether Spiritism is a religion or not. So some of the psychiatrists that I'm now working with and depend on to give me their more grounded information and their perspective, they say, well, Spiritism isn't really a religion, it's a social movement. And I think that's very important to look at. So these particular community centers, some people might attend religiously. In other words, it really is taking the place of their religious attendance in more conventional religion. But they go to a Spiritist center for spiritual healing and attending to their health from a spiritual perspective. So when I heard there were 13,000 of them, and I've been to them in the city, into the country, in the favelas, I've been to a lot of different varieties, but I started being so impressed with how many there were, and I thought, you know, it's like a convenience store. We go to a 7-Eleven and we go there and we get bread, right? And we get, I mean, depending if they have gluten-free bread, right? But we look for bread and we look for eggs and we look for milk, and maybe, depending on who we are, we might look for cigarettes and some kind of an upper, coffee or Coke or whatever they call the new superpower drinks. So we're looking for that just to kind of get along in our survival, right? Make it through the day. But I started thinking, you know, those Spiritist centers are like a convenience store for spiritual healing. You can drop in. You don't have to show your membership at the door. In fact, they completely support anonymity. So you aren't going to be tracked anywhere. They aren't going to be sending out flyers or mailers for you to make a donation. You can get a spiritual healing similar to a Reiki treatment just on entering in. In fact, they prefer that people get that before entering in. It's like dusting something off, right? You dust the subtle body and clean the subtle body before people even enter. And then there are classes where people can discuss, well, what are the karmic effects of past lifetimes and how's it impacting me now? And they might brush shoulders with a medical intuitive who can give them a diagnosis from the position of a medical intuitive. They might be able to have blessed water, pray with other people in order to move their consciousness up, and have a great deal of fellowship. In other words, be able to talk with, I think I just spoke. How's that? So be able to talk with other people who are also interested in spiritual evolution. Did I do something wrong? Okay, thanks. So it's a drop-in spot or a convenience store for spiritual evolution as well as spiritual healing. Can you imagine if we had that here? I mean, what an amazing concept. And a lot of people, if they're feeling depressed, anxious, and that's been going on for a while, or things aren't going along too well at home, or someone has got problems with alcohol or whatever, they'll go to the Spiritist Center and say, I need to look at the spiritual dimensions of these problems while I'm looking to conventional doctors. In fact, the Spiritists say, please go to a conventional doctor. We are complementary. We're working with them. We aren't alternative. We aren't saying everything is spiritual. Don't go to those guys down the road. So anyway, I'm thinking of them as the 7-Eleven of spiritual healing in Brazil, which might be an interesting way to focus on this. So why don't we, I could continue talking and telling stories and stuff, but why don't we do the film? You'll get a little bit more background and then we can go from there. My, So as I'm watching this film, I'm feeling again very grateful to the people who helped so that this film could be made. And just for your interest, and I know a lot of you are struggling students who are, you know, their posters up saying, how do we get out of the debt? And maybe on the other side of it, how do we afford what we really want to do? And one of the things that happened to me when I first went to a Spiritist center in Brazil was I went to John of God Center, and several mediums walked up to me and said, you're here because you're going to spread Spiritism to the rest of the world. And I said, I said to myself, I think they're mistaken. They confused me with somebody else. But I'm used to doing a lot of meditation, and so I took this into meditation to try to find some kind of reality check with it. And I started getting deeply inspired to learn more about Spiritism, and also almost immediately inspired to write about it. And I don't think of myself as a complete pushover, like waiting for someone to tell me what to do. But there I was, doing what they told me, and then I thought, how am I going to afford to do films if I'm inspired to do films? I mean, that costs money. And I went to John F. God at one point, and I said, I'm being inspired to, I mean, it was a serial kind of event, but I would go the first time and said, I'm being inspired to do this book. Is it mine to do? And he'd say, yes. I'd say, well, and then a little while later, I'd say, well, I don't know what to do about the money. And can you help? Meaning, can the spirits, or whatever it is that's assisting him, and he's a quite well-known now, all over the world, well-known healer, I need assistance. Can I have assistance, please, for this? And yes, I got the assistance. I'd say, how's this nod going to turn into the real thing, you know, that's in the bank so I can afford to do these books and films? And the help came. And it came from people like Lawrence Rockefeller calling me up and saying, how can I help you? I mean, the synchronicities just happen time and time again, including this dear lady here in blue, Kay Sandberg, who was in a position to help being a fiscal sponsor while grants came through, and then has just always been a delightful source of support and friendship over the years. So at this point, I have my own foundation, the Foundation for Energy Therapies, which is a charitable organization, and through which I'll be doing the research to follow. Before I show a little PowerPoint on a little bit about the research, does anyone have a question or other comment about the film? Yes, Arthur.
Well, first let me say that I wish every student and faculty member at ITP could see this film and ones like them, because it presents things that they need to know about in ways that are possible for them to grasp from a Western point of view. And Dan Benor who is shown in this, is a highly regarded researcher and exponent of psychical healing. So I think you're working with very powerful energies. I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Arthur. I hope that also goes on your tape, because Dan Benor is one of those courageous psychiatrists who's willing to go really out on a limb and speak about things that generally people are thrown off the limb and off the tree for. You lose your professional reputation by speaking about these things. Arthur, you're another courageous person, clinical psychologist who's willing to talk about these things. So I have been adventuring in Brazil for a lot of time, and so I haven't been doing PowerPoints, wandering around the country doing PowerPoints. This is my new calling. So I have a PowerPoint that's been constructed by myself and the person I'm going to be doing research with, and say a little prayer if it works. So where's that wonderful man I was helping with? Okay.
Here I am.
You call me like that.
That's right.
So, view, slideshow, and then well, I have to push this. I know because of various things going on, but cool. Have you know I also bought an iPhone in the last 3 weeks. Really joining the human race. Okay, so Sheila Wang is a clinical psychologist who has gotten several grants from the National Institutes of Health. And I happened to meet her when she was visiting John F. God in about 2 months ago. Wonderful woman. So I just wanted to give you a sense of where she's coming from. And the work that we want to set out to do is really look at the Spiritist treatment of serious mental disorders. And we're going to start just with working with one part of it, which is the disobsession. What you saw in the film, which was the hardest part to see, was the disobsession, and it happens in quite a dark room with a very small light, just enough for people to make each other out, not trip over anything, and be able to read a little bit. So, but it is the one treatment that is most unusual for us outside of Brazil. And can have the most impact on people with really serious mental illness. So Sheila was also a recipient of monies coming through Judith Nanjoy, and has been centered at the Integrative Medicine within the Integrated Medicine Initiative at Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago. So there are philanthropists out there who are wanting to support research on aspects of healing not being currently rigorously studied, like the impact of touch therapies. So some of the work that she's recently done, Sheila, has been on touch therapies, and she mentioned that well, here are some of the results of one of her last studies. This is with doing healing touch with small children, and also massage on the parents of small children who are hospitalized for severe illness. So as you can see, there are measurements here for distress, pain, tension, discomfort, upset mood. And the light blue is prior to the healing touch, and the red is after the healing touch. So you can see there's a very dramatic decrease in distress and all these pain, etc., as a result of the healing touch. And then this is for the parents of the children, before and after they have a complete massage. And again, very, very dramatic outcomes, which I think also might say something about what's going on in Brazil and why the treatment is so effective there, because they're doing not exactly touch for health. You notice that they were doing something more akin to Reiki, which involves no touch, but it's still a kind of energy transfer that's done with a great deal of empathy and compassion. So the work that Sheila does is very much oriented towards working with that loving compassion, whether it's touch or no touch. From our point of view, working with people with mental disorders, I think it's very important to have some kind of a therapeutic work where you aren't touching patients, because that, of course, can get pretty complex with people who are severely disturbed. So this is a little bit more about the Foundation for Energy Therapies, which I started a few years ago. So we are dedicated actually to energy therapies more generically, or more generally, having to do with lots of different kinds of work. But because I've been so fascinated by what's going on in Brazil, we're now more dedicated to initiating research in Brazil to study the effectiveness of the Spiritist therapies and assisting in the publication of the results. That feels very important to me, to really go for the more international distribution of the effectiveness of these therapies. And also offering educational programs, including tours to Brazil for health professionals and graduate school students. For those of you who might be interested, or if you know someone who might be interested, I'm now initiating tours that are for 1 week, going to a city by the name of Goiânia, which you may not know of. It's in the state of Goiás, which is in the center of Brazil. And the reason I selected it is because they have a large Spiritist Psychiatric Hospital there, which is very progressive. So on the same piece of land, which used to be a farm, by the way, it has 100-year-old mango trees and fruit trees of different kinds, as well as streams running through it that used to be available to the crops, as well as cows, ducks, chickens running around. They have not only these farm animals and patients, but they have a school for children. And that doesn't mean children with mental illness or children at risk. It's children who will then have some kind of a Spiritist background as they're going through a regular curriculum. And they have what they call a cultural center, which is really a Spiritist center where people can come. That does not mean they have to have a psychiatric disturbance. It just is. It's one of the 7-Elevens of spiritual healing, okay? So they can go there for all the reasons I discussed before, as well as getting training to be a medium and a healer. So there are classes for that in the same compound. And one of the reasons I was drawn to that particular hospital is because the man who is the head of the hospital, Jeziel, feels very strongly that we need to back off with the overuse of psychiatric medication. So that means there's a minimal amount of psychiatric medication used when it's very important and obvious, clear that that's a best part of treatment, but it's not the standard of care as it has come to be in many of our clinics and private practices here. So I have some information on the trips here. This is just a very quick blurb about it. This is a longer blurb with detailed itinerary, and this longer blurb with detailed itineraries on my website, which is emmabragdon.com, and there's some cards up here if anyone's interested. So we believe components of this model of care can be imported to help our ailing healthcare system and enhance educational programs aimed at training students to practice effective models of integrative healthcare. We are a bridge in that effort. So it has come to my attention that integrative is a really important word right now. Body, mind, and spirit, and it may be even more important than the word transpersonal, although I hesitate to get into any kind of language around transpersonal today. But it is obvious to me that people are saying integrative, and yet there's a great deal of confusion about how do we handle that spirit part of the body, mind, spirit. And that's one place that the Brazilians shine, and that they've been working on developing this for over 100 years. So, again, the money trail. The Marion Institute, Lloyd Symington Foundation, Rudolf Steiner Foundation, Lawrence Rockefeller, and other generous philanthropists have stepped forward in the last 11 years to support my work, and I'm deeply grateful to them. This is my contact information. It's also on my cards up here. And the most recent work, I mentioned to you the book that was supposed to be here that isn't. This is a proof copy of it. And then this particular one I wanted to mention because it's being, it was published by English publishing house, Jessica Kingsley, and she sees it as and is putting it out as a textbook, medical school textbook or textbook for graduate schools. And at first I thought, oh, how great. And then she said, and it'll be $100 a copy. And I thought, oh, that's not good. So in hardcover, that's the price they put on it. Amazon.com, it's around 80 something depending on the day. But this is an anthology. So most of the chapters were written by Brazilian psychiatrists, psychologists, and some of them are psychiatrists who are also mediums who speak about how they manage being both. But it's a very interesting look from lots of different perspectives on the Spiritist model, including the history of Spiritism, the history of the hospitals, etc. So if the library will let me, and Neil King will allow it, I'm going to gift a copy to the library here. So it's part of, it'll be available. So the book Cardiac Spiritism I wrote several years ago, basically to not only introduce what are the basic principles and foundations of Spiritism, but to say here's the way it shows up in different centers. And because Spiritists are so charitable in their orientation, by the way, they think charitable work is the fastest way to enlightenment. So they're big into charity for spiritual evolution. There was nothing out there that was profiling the different kinds of Spiritist centers. So the book Cardiac Spiritism, that I have some copies of here for sale if you're interested, does take a look at that. And so you saw a couple in the film, but it's very interesting to make to see really the diversity within Brazil itself. And so you just saw the film Spiritism. Sheila was kind enough to put together the next few slides showing that where we're moving is bringing this model of integrated medicine together with standard medical practice and do evidence-based research and moving towards the integrated medicine being included within the standard medical care. So Sheila and I are both very attracted to that model. We realize it's not necessarily a path that's easy. However, the dominant model is incomplete.
Has meant a lot to me.
That poor little piggy, right? That got cured. So, I don't know if Robert Whitaker's work is known at ITP. Arthur, do you know? And Robert Whitaker is a journalist who won a first prize for investigative journalism in 2011, and he went into the long-term long-term effects of psychiatric medication. He did a fabulous study on it. Anatomy of an Epidemic is the book, and it's for anyone who's interested in looking into this area of psychiatric medications and some of the newest research that really brings it together in an integrated way that's very easy to read. I highly recommend that book, and it's definitely taken me in the direction of looking at the possibility that a lot of people who are taking the psychiatric medication may be doing themselves a great favor for a short term, but as soon as it gets into the long term, then you can run into tremendous problems, including systemic failure and cognitive decline and abbreviating life itself. So it's a book with a very profound message, and Marcia Angel, who is the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, reviewed the book and said, from her point of view, and she's a bioethicist at Harvard right now, from her point of view, that the book was substantiated by the research that she knows, and her article titled Illusions of Psychiatry was in the New York Review of Books last summer in July and late June, if anyone is interested. So our aim is to work respectfully and concurrently with both paradigms, the Spiritist way of perceiving and implementing health. Interesting, it started in the mid-19th century, huh? And more recent ways of perceiving, implementing positive change, measuring effects within the body and mind, which originate in the biochemical model. So, this is a wonderful graphic just rendition of how we usually look at the body, and we break it down into the systems and organs, and then we go smaller reductionist model back to DNA. And what we're looking at is not detracting from that, but adding the effects of the environment, physical, social, energy, environment, very important, and the nutritional. I like the term psychosphere that comes from Spiritism in terms of what is the energy environment that we're in. Emotions in the mind, attitudes, patterns, and beliefs. What gives life meaning, and of course, how spirituality and mindfulness affect our health. So, I'm going to stop talking so much. Clearly, we're dealing with, especially moving into these realms that the Spiritists are working with, is a very complex reality. And if we just approached it from the conventional analytic perspective, we would see individuals as separate, matter-based. We'd be targeting symptoms and focusing on local effects. But in addition to the conventional analytic, adding the whole systems approach, we're adding that individuals are interconnected, energy-based. We're looking at the health and balance of the whole system, and especially here with non-local effects. So the disobsession that you saw was working on patients who were not present. That isn't made clear in the film. But all of the disobsession work, again, is usually working with people who are very seriously disabled, is working on them while they may be asleep somewhere else or doing their thing on another ward and having absolutely no knowledge that the disobsession is happening. However, their families have authorized and given permission for it to happen. So we want to be conducting studies that are well designed and meet standards of high quality that you see in conventional research, provide evidence-based data, and honor both paradigms. Develop new research methods that are sensitive to changes in the whole systems paradigm, and build common ground for the two paradigms. Developing a meaningful language, which is no small thing, as you all know. I'm sure we all share that perspective. And then use the new concepts in science to expand areas of overlap and investigative mechanisms. Complex systems, quantum theory, multiple dimensions. I went over a lot of these as I was talking about the 7-Eleven, but I think I didn't say much about the study groups and meditation. And I just wanted to say that one thing that's impressed me about Spiritism itself is that the introduction to it might be to give someone a bowl of soup if they are hungry. And then as they regather their attention, are more able to communicate what's going on with them, to listen and offer some empathic listening and also guidance. How can you use the Spiritist treatments to benefit you? But a very important component is to bring people into a place where they can really study life itself. Like why are we all here, and where are we going, and where do we come from? So giving people a much broader context for life itself, which can be a tremendous liberation from psychological issues when people can locate where they are in the map of life. And oftentimes we don't have that within our religious organizations. The other thing about it is for those people who are entranced with the whole idea of developing intuition and mediumship, there are a lot of things that we can do, even in weekend workshops, to move towards that. And Omega, I noticed Omega Institute has lots and lots of workshops in that area because there's so much interest these days. The Spiritists would say, if you want to move into developing your mediumship, you need 3 things, and they're extremely important. Discipline, discipline, and discipline. So that's also, I think, very, that's indicative of what the Spiritists are about, is that they do a tremendous amount of training, especially for the mediums who are going to work with the people who are very seriously disturbed. But even those mediums who are working in the Spiritist centers with people who just have the normal dysfunction and ups and downs of life are also highly trained, and there's supervision, and there's checking in at least annually. Even if you're the head of the Spiritist centers, you get feedback from the people who are working under you about how you're doing. So lots and lots of teamwork, as well as a very disciplined attitude in moving in these realms that can be very ungrounding. So I mentioned that we're just going to be studying disobsession in our first study, and all the subjects will be receiving all aspects of conventional care as needed. So it's not just bringing people in or having them do disobsession or not disobsession. I think I'm running way out of time, but so I know we started late, but rather than, well, this is important. Both Sheila and I feel that, let's call it grace, is, although some people will call it God or higher spirit, higher power, is always flowing in the halls of hospitals in the USA, as well as the meeting rooms of Spiritist practitioners in Brazil. Our work has involved compassionate touch and various forms of spiritual work when medical doctors collaborate with healers and sensitive for diagnostics and healing, both are done in the spirit of loving compassion. We believe that we're all called to be more compassionate with each other in our everyday lives, and we'd like to contribute evidence that adding specific forms of compassionate care makes health care systems more effective. We're both grateful for being able to propose research at this time at the places that want to collaborate with us and with the co-workers now coming together. And we trust that the team members who will offer the financial support will enter that field soon. And we're open to suggestions. This is a nice graphic that Sheila did of that energetic of what I was just reading. And if you would like to stay more up to date with the work that Sheila and I will be doing, as well as the explorations that are coming out of Brazil and how things progress, please feel free to sign up for a free quarterly newsletter. And again, contact information specifically about the Foundation for Energy Therapies. So the PowerPoint worked. I'm so happy.
Excellent.
Any questions that I can try to answer? Yeah.
The spirit obsession, you talked about it primarily with mental disorders, but does it manifest as physical disorders as well?
Yeah. And in fact, the other film that I did on John of God goes into that a little bit more. And there's one particular story of a man who had a brain tumor. He was taken to one of our best hospitals in the United States, and they basically said, you know, we can give you chemo, but it won't be long. You're going to be out of here pretty soon, exit door. And he felt that the chemo was important for him to do just as a trial, and then he said, no, I'm not going to do this anymore, and no radiation. He went down to John of God Center, and he's, let's see, now it's been about 6 years. He's completely free of his brain tumor. He's married. They're expecting a child. He's completely free of the brain tumor, and he says on the film that it was a spiritual obsession. And as soon as he got to that and realized what the core of it was, then he could be released from it, and it happened while he was in meditation. So that's not to say that everybody should check behind them to see if there's a spirit obsessing them if they have a headache, but it does mean that it can be very much a part of our lives, and it can show up. And I think the psychiatrists in Britain who work with the Spirit Release Foundation have made a huge contribution in this area. They've said, you know, it really doesn't matter if people believe in spirits or not. Let's just call that spirit obsession negative pattern of beliefs that are all kind of glommed together and created kind of, you know, rat running around in its own cycle and just that can't stop. So, and then glue it with some other kind of congestion that might just seem impossible to get through, and it has a life of its own. So you don't have to look around for the spirits or find a medium to sort it out, but it can be a very useful term, and outside of that thing we call pathology that none of us want to have on our CVs. Yeah?
Just one thing is there's another group that has the room at 5, so it's 5:10. So last question, I'm very brief, and maybe conversation can continue.
Okay, real brief. What's the point of the room where they're doing the disobsessions being so dark?
That's a very interesting question. So I don't know if I can answer it completely, but part of what happens in the ambiance is they have something like classical music going on, which and they say a prayer before the disobsession. So it helps people calm and become more detached from just, having gotten off the freeway and maybe not digesting their dinner as well, or thinking they have to cook dinner when they get home and what is it going to be. And so it's the calming influence. And also in that a half light, the mediums are more able to be in touch with that kind of between the worlds and become more aware of the spirits. But not be completely out, whereas darkness might take us into our imagination a little bit more than is necessary. Well, thank you very much for being a wonderful audience. I'm happy to stay for a little bit and chat with people, but I don't know where to go.